Okay. Fire Authority to order. So welcome to this extraordinary meeting. I'll set out a bit later on the reason for the extraordinary meeting. Just for any members that are dialing in, if I could ask you to remain on camera, that's right, off camera. If you wish to speak, to raise your hands and we'll bring you in. For members of the public, this meeting will be recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel. Could I ask, sorry, Councillor Day, if you could go off camera just as we commence the meeting, and then come on if you wish to. We'll bring you in if you wish to speak. Thank you. So item number 1, apologies for absence.
Councillors Adair, Chapel, Christensen, Hall, Lambert and Walsh.
Right, thank you. So second is to approve the minutes of the meeting, the Fire Authority on the 15th of February. Are there any questions as to accuracy? Happy to approve. Thank you very much. That moves us to matters arising from the previous meeting. So the first action was FA 48, Chief Fire Officer to ask the respective councils to write reflecting the authority's views on the impact of losing the filing grant and USAR funding. Those letters, as I understand it, have yet to be sent, although obviously the USAR funding position I'm going to update on shortly. And it's worth saying I have also separately updated both councils on the position on USAR funding as well. Second action was FA 49, the Director of Finance and Assets to report after the event on Executive Committee if officers pay off debts early. There's no update on that required. So we haven't paid off any debts early. FA 50, pay policy principles and statement, the Head of Human Resources to provide ethnicity pay gap information as well as gender pay gap in future reports. There's no update as yet, although I've received separately a briefing on ethnicity pay gap reporting, which I'm looking at. FA 52, apprenticeship programme update. So concerted effort from the authority in approaching large national employers, particularly those based in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, to ask for support with levy transfer because there was a significant underspend with some of these larger employers. So I've been provided with the details of the top 10 large national employers based in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, and I'll be writing to them asking for their support. So those are all the actions arising. It brings us to item number 4, disclosure of interest. Are there any pecuniary interests that members wish to disclose? Seeing any? So that's a no. Which moves us to Chairman's announcements. So I have 3 announcements to share with the meeting. So as members will be aware, at various meetings over the course of the last few months, both Fire Authority, Overview and Scrutiny and Executive, we've been discussing the issue of USAR funding. Members will be aware that I set out that with the support of local members of Parliament, particularly Rob Butler, in Aylesbury, we had been in discussions both with civil servants and with the Minister about funding for USAR. Following those discussions and specifically a discussion that I had with Rob, I took a decision at the beginning of March to make a formal representation to the Minister about our funding for USAR, and he received a letter from me on the 30th of March setting out what I believe was the compelling case for supporting continued funding of USAR both nationally but specifically in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. Please say the Minister responded immediately that day to that letter to confirm that he was looking into it and would update further. And I think, as some members know, but to put into the public domain, we were delighted to receive on the 13th of April confirmation from the Home Office that the funding for all urban search and rescue teams, including ours in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, will continue until at least April 2025, and that the Minister intended to seek in the next public sector spending round the investment required to continue funding for a longer term period beyond that, and specifically to seek the funding for the capital investment required in USAR assets, which is excellent news for us here and indeed nationally. As members will also know, an adjournment debate was held in Parliament last week. I think it was last week. time's flying by, where the service was recognised for its contribution to the local community. And if members haven't read the Hansard that I sent out, I'd recommend it, because there was some fantastic recognition of the work that the service does in our communities, which we all know and recognise. Specifically in that debate, the Minister set out his belief that he can put a compelling case forward to the Treasury for the continued funding of USAR, which was good to hear. And Rob Butler set out in the adjournment debate a number of the reasons why we believe that funding should continue here in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, which was most welcome. I was also pleased in that adjournment debate, just on a slightly separate note, that the excellent decision that's been taken in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes over a number of years to do disclosure and barring checks on firefighters, and specifically enhanced DBS checks on firefighters, was recognised by the Minister and described as best practice that the rest of the service should follow. So I thought that was a particularly welcome acknowledgement. So just that update on USAR, and I hope we all agree that's really good news for the team here and for our communities. Second item, I'll take any questions once I've done all of them. Second item is on breathing apparatus. And I know members will have received an email briefing, but for members of the public, from Monday this week, our firefighters began wearing new breathing apparatus sets. The rollout of the Interspiro BA sets form part of our ongoing commitment to ensure our crews have the best equipment to enable them to provide the best response to our communities. The breathing apparatus collaborative contract is worth a total of £1,768,468 across the three services. That is Buckinghamshire, Milton Keynes, Royal Berkshire and Oxfordshire. The collaborative procurement process delivered a total joint cost avoidance saving of £532,178, with an individual saving to BFRS of £187,239 for the first year. It's a large amount of money, but when it comes to our most valuable assets, our people, I know all members will agree that it's a worthy investment. Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service is the second of the three services to go live with the new sets, and this milestone marks a significant achievement in the three-year project, which will ultimately see the same equipment used by firefighters at each of the three Thames Valley services. And I think I'm right in saying that I noticed on social media that within 10 minutes of the Aylesbury crew receiving their sets, they were deployed, which was great to read. So congratulations to everybody involved in that project. And then the third and final announcement that I wanted to share is I'm delighted to say that a member of Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service, Anya Chaminska, will be representing the service at the King's coronation next weekend. So congratulations to Anya, and delighted that she's representing the service. Any questions, comments on those chairman's announcements? Great, thank you very much. So that moves us to petitions.
None, Chairman.
Thank you. Item number 7, questions.
Yeah, none, Chairman.
And then we move to the substantive item and the reason for the extraordinary meeting today. So we received, as a fire authority and all services across the England and Wales, received a report of His Majesty's Inspectorate, Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, a review that they had undertaken into values and culture in the fire and rescue services. Now, clearly, at the Fire Authority, we've discussed culture and values a number of times through the last few months, and indeed, I think, as I've said before, it's one of the first things that the Chief Fire Officer and I discuss every week in our weekly catch-ups. But I think all of us would recognise that that report was difficult reading for those of us that were involved in fire and rescue services, but also essential reading. That report set out 9 themes and 35 recommendations. And I took a decision with the Chief Fire Officer that the report was of such significance that was important that we met in a timely way that enabled officers to reflect on the report and integrate the findings and recommendations into our own work, but also to enable members to undertake scrutiny. And I think certainly in the time that I've been on the authority over the last 9 or 10 months, I think this is probably the most important meeting that all of us as members will take part in, because it's our role as elected members to scrutinise and hold the the service to account, and culture and values get right to the heart of the confidence that the communities can have in the service. And so I hope over the course of this meeting we'll have a good, thorough and challenging debate about the work that we're doing to make sure that we're ensuring that this is a service in which everybody can feel respected, valued and safe in their work. So those are the comments from me. Before I hand over to Anne-Marie, that's going to run us through the detail, Jason, I don't know if you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, just to say that we accept the recommendations in full from the Chief Officer's perspective and from the senior team's perspective, and we'll work over the next coming months and coming years to actually change the culture within the service. I've been in the fire and rescue service for 30 years, and this has been an ongoing issue, stretching back in terms of, in my memories, in 1999, when HMICFRS at that time talked about whether the fire and rescue service was institutionally racist. And the dial really hasn't changed or moved in any way in that 30 years. It's something that the fire and rescue service as a sector, and also in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, must grasp and must make a difference for the future, in my mind. There have been numerous reports. Again, the dial has not moved, but this is the real opportunity to make a change and a difference. And I will say, the service is not complacent in any way. We're going to go through the recommendations and some of the things we will have started, and some of the things, there are a number of recommendations that we will have completed, but we don't say that we've completed them in any way in terms of complacency. The final thing is the tone and of the whole organisation, and that this is what we've adopted from the very start, is that we should never be defensive. We should always accept people's views, different views, etc. And it's not, we shouldn't be in a position whereby we're saying, actually, look at these great things we're doing. If we're not doing one recommendation, then that's an issue. And the final thing I would say is that people have come forward since the London Fire Brigade report and before the HMICFRS report, and we have dealt with and continue to deal with issues within the service. And I would say to anybody who's watching this in terms of online, etc., if you have any thoughts or or concerns, please don't hesitate to come forward. You will be believed, and we will investigate, and we will move forward with the response in an appropriate manner. Over to Anne-Marie, please.
Thank you. So this paper is to present an update and 3 recommendations following the release of His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue, HMICFRS, Values and Culture Report. Following the release of the LFB report and subsequent articles in the press, HMICFRS were asked to produce a spotlight report on the values and culture in the English fire services. They reduced the findings from the second full round of inspections and would comment on the following: values and culture, bullying, harassment and discrimination, and also highlight examples of promising and innovative practices established in respect of values and culture. The report was released on the 30th of March. It sets out their findings, supported by 35 recommendations to be delivered by all fire and rescue services alongside the government and national fire bodies. We welcome both the reports and support all the recommendations. We have always taken the culture of our service extremely seriously, and we want to make sure all our staff and the public we serve are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Of the 35 recommendations, 19 are owned by the Chief Fire Officer. The update in Appendix 1 shows progress against these recommendations. 2 are complete, 13 are in progress on track, and 4 are not started. Of the 4 not started, a number are reliant on other recommendations being completed first. A couple of areas to highlight are our values that can be seen on the wall in the corner of this room have been in place since 2011 and are in line with the NFCC Code of Ethics. We also have a whistleblower policy in place and a line run by an external company. And as presented at the last exec, work is ongoing to promote this line via a Speak Up campaign. As mentioned in the Chairman's announcement, in 2019, we increased our vetting and moved to the annual Enhanced with Fire List, DBS, for all our frontline staff. This isn't just staff that work operationally, this is anybody that comes into contact with the public. We believe this is leading practice in the way fire and rescue services should vet their staff. Moving on to quality impact assessments, a thorough review of the process took place in 2022, which led to the update of the template and supporting guidance. And this is a key focus as we move our papers through our governance processes. We have also completed biannual staff surveys since 2017 with response rates of over 65%, allowing staff to raise their feedback on a broad range of topics anonymously. And the authority recently approved funding for this survey to move to annually from 23-24. But we know there is lots more to do. So following feedback from the previous, following feedback regarding the various streams of people work, plans and actions, including the previously presented Exploring Our Culture paper, these recommendations will now feed into a larger people plan. This will ensure we can monitor important progress. Thank you for your time. I'll hand back to Jason and Shannon.
Thank you. Members wish to speak, ask questions? Councillor Darlington.
So I guess the two things I wanted to say on this is one, I think the HMIC FRS report is actually not as far ahead in the discussions as we are in terms of our planning. Yeah, I can see it's still very much focused on processes and procedures, and we continually really focused on how do you create that environment and that culture change. And I think that's really important. Something that Jason said that was quite interesting. You said that people were coming forward. Now we've talked before about one of the challenges being we don't find out about this until they leave the service. I don't know if you could say anything in this public meeting, because I don't want to put anybody feeling like they can't, you know, that it will be discussed in a public forum. But I wonder if there's any reflection from you about what's changed and potentially what we could do more of to create that environment where they feel they can come forward. And then the second thing I just wanted to ask, which I think is really important for our discussion, is do we have any update on some of the progress that we've done, on some of the actions that are outside of the ones stated by the government? And the final thing I was just going to say is there's a lot of involvement here in reporting back to the Home Office. It makes me a bit nervous, given what we know about the culture of the Home Office through various Home Office reports and various complaints that have been made within the Home Office. Is that really the right place for this to be reported back into in a way that we think it will be taken as seriously as I know the senior management here want to take it seriously? And I think we have to be open about that if we're going to have open discussions.
Okay, so I'll take them in terms of people coming forward. We do have people coming forward, and we've had 3 cases. That some of them cases are ongoing. So I can't talk about them disciplinary cases, but because obviously, well, I just can't talk about them. But there are 3 cases that we're aware of. In terms of people coming forward, there are a number of things actually. We've tried to, over the last number of years, with the surveys that we've put in terms of staff satisfaction and culture surveys, trying to engage people as much as we possibly can, and that has led to people speaking up a little bit more. Definitely, it feels to me. We've also implemented things like mental health champions, which gives people an opportunity to speak to other people in a different way. We're not complacent. There may still be people who want to come forward who've had previously bad experiences, but we monitor on a regular basis, for example, grievances, disciplines, all of them sorts of things on a regular basis. I don't know, Mick, whether you want to touch base on that in terms of people coming forward.
Yeah, just on that, our HR advisory and development manager who heads up our employee relations, I meet with Faye fortnightly and sometimes even more regularly than that. And we review every case that comes in, so that because some of the criticisms around the report that when it came out was of services that hadn't dealt with things previously and then come back around again. So, you know, I've got a lot of confidence in the fact that as an authority, we haven't got anything that we've all previously dealt with that we haven't dealt with correctly. We don't know what we don't know. But I meet with with Faye regularly, and her team do reach out to the whole organisation and are trusted, and with our welfare officer as well. So there are different routes through, but there is still more to do. Absolutely.
The difficulty that we do have sometimes is the fact that people come forward and obviously they want confidentiality, and you want to be able to share not their experiences, but you want to be able to share. You want to be able to share the issues about what we've learned, but we can't because they've said I don't want you to share it at all. But we have, and we continue to, when people come forward, if there's criminal misconduct, we have a record, and we continue to report that to the police. In some of the issues that have come up in other services, there have been criminal acts which have not been reported to the police. We will do that, and we've done that in the past, and we continue to do so. So in terms of people coming forward, we would encourage people to come forward. We do have people coming forward, and we do deal with the issues. That's not to say we're complacent in any way. In terms of the reporting, I think the reporting issues will go back to HMIC-FRS rather than the Home Office to a certain degree. So there is something about that, and we continue to report, and we'll continue to report HMIC-FRS on the cases and the types of cases that we're receiving.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report, and thank you, Anne-Marie, for the parent report. The sections 24, 28 and 20 in the report. I question, we read lots of reports, we all do read reports, and we have been analysis since 2017. I think how the information that we digest and how we process that information is key. I would hope, but not for today, but at a future meeting, we should have reports supporting those key factors so that we could review the recommendations against the our own processes, which we're not doing. We're reviewing the recommendations. So I think that's something that I would imagine Anne-Marie will bring back to us at a later date so that we can quantify where change is taking place against these recommendations. This is a very serious paper. It's a very serious matter. I do question, as previously said, that I believe you'll be corrected that this started from an inquiry and then came out to Parliament and then came back. I would have thought the most logical place for this to go back was back through the parliamentary scrutiny before it went to the Secretary of State, because that route, anyone who's watched parliamentary scrutiny brings out some of the best scrutiny of process, cross-party scrutiny, and you get to the full understanding of it. I worry about putting it in and then it coming back out of the sausage machine, not quite being assessed, and the importance of it needs to be continuously assessed. Well, if you go to item 28, I would have put item 28 in with item 24. We moved diversity into a separate item. I think diversity challenges and that are important as all things alongside abuse and welfare. It really should have been included in there alongside them, because then again, we're putting it to one side. It really should be foremost and upfront against all the work we do. But this is the way the recommendations are given to us. So we can't actually, that might tell us more about our thinking and their thinking. I believe this authority would see that within 24. I don't think the staff wouldn't, but it's the way that they fractured it into the way they look to see it. So would it be worth us asking some inquiry around the process where this goes? And I respect the work that everybody's doing here, and I've seen the work that everybody's doing here, and I've seen the report, I've seen the constant diligence, attention to detail. And when Emily says we're quite a way forward to what other people are, she's absolutely right. So in brief, the process where it goes from here, I think we need a discussion about that and the process, how we deal with this in line with the work that Anne-Marie's been putting in place for a very long time, Chairman.
So let me answer the scrutiny process about where the report bit goes, and then we can discuss 28, 24. So I think it's important that we stay focused on what we can control, and what we control is how we as an authority provide scrutiny and oversight of the work of the Chief Fire Officer and his team across these issues, and what the HMI report has given us. And I certainly don't disagree that there are elements of the work that we're doing here that are ahead of what the HMI report has captured, but I also think it's important that we're not complacent, that actually there are things in this report as well that we're not doing and that we do need to address. And there's always a balance to be struck. But I think it's important that we as members are scrutinising that this is one lens on the culture and values of our service, where we're being asked to demonstrate that some core expectations on the service nationally that we're delivering locally. And so I think the first thing to say is let's get our own house in order first around making sure that we're confident that the actions that officers are putting in place are sufficient to give us assurance that we're making progress in addressing values and culture, and that we should track that through the normal mechanism. So I anticipate that this report will be reviewed by the Executive Committee regularly, because I think we're also talking about a risk being escalated to the Corporate Risk Register. There's clearly a role for the Overview and Audit Committee in reviewing it, and the full authority. So I think my first observation is we should focus on what we control, which is our own scrutiny and our own oversight of this item. What Parliament does, I think, is a matter for Parliament. My personal expectation will be, I find it hard after such a seminal report to believe that the Home Affairs Select Committee will not want to be reviewing and discussing with the Policing and Fire Minister the progress on culture and values. And indeed, if you look at either watch the adjournment debate or saw the Hansard, the Fire Minister was very clear that he expects to see a response from Fire and Rescue Services to this. I think what I would say you can be assured about is, over the course of the last few weeks, Jason and I have been meeting with almost all of the members of Parliament across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes to cover a range of issues to do with their local constituencies and the service as a whole. And one of the most significant topics of discussion with those members of Parliament has been culture and values, both from their own specific interest and desire to understand what we're doing to address it, but also our desire to share with them what they're doing. I absolutely anticipate that feeds into then their own, and indeed it was brought up in the adjournment debate by Rob Butler specifically, their own challenge and scrutiny of the ministers on that as well. So I think the point that nationally we should scrutinise the stuff is right. Let's stay focused. My view is we should stay clear on what we're able to control, which is our own piece of work. I think your point, just briefly before I pass hand over to Anne-Marie on that, I think your point on 28, if I understand it right, is that we should be making sure that ED&I data is integrated and tracked through our performance management process. I think that's a very fair point. I think the data itself won't move sufficiently regularly that it will necessarily, in a quarterly review, we'll be able to do much with it. But I certainly think it's a very good catch that we should make sure it's properly integrated into that reporting. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, so I think there's some interesting points in there. In terms of performance measures, we take those to the Exec and the Fire Authority. The Chairman's point about EDI data, that is due to come to the Fire Authority, but you're right, it doesn't shift on a quarterly basis enough to warrant bringing it on there. But I think all these measures we can definitely make sure we're highlighting and sharing how they're moving, and if they're moving and why they're moving, probably in a bit more detail than we have done previously. I think the reason it has been split out is because they do treat the EDI sections as a slightly different area, and there was a lot of challenge when they went out and inspected around how people were even capturing the data in the first place. So I think it was captured as a specific recommendation because people weren't even capturing it to start with, so therefore they couldn't even report on it in the first place. In terms of, I think we have got some work internally to do to work out how we update you in a clear, succinct manner. But I do pick up on Emily's point, is this is bigger than just a task and finish, tick a box, right procedure and move on. Just done a week of leadership. It's definitely a wicked problem for the other people that have been on the course. So yeah, it was definitely got to be asking ourselves a lot more of why, rather than here's a procedure and away we go. So yes, we'll take that on board.
Thank you for those responses, and thank you for the Chairman's agreements about the significance around 28. Of course, when we move on to 34, recommendation 34, really encapsulate the what we're trying to actually get, which is ethics and the way that we actually all deal with things, not only public servants, how we would deal with things as employees of the fire authority. I think 28 is very key. Ethics is always, how do I put it, one person's ethics is another person's disagreement about an ethic. So I think that needs some careful monitoring around how we interpret that around the letter of the law, not the opinion of the law. And I think because quite often we all are in public life. Unfortunately, the opinion of the law seems to be what's talked about, not the letter of the law. So I think we do need to make sure that we have done work around the ethics to actually understand the legal criteria which is phased in and based in. Because if we don't do that, we're in danger of understating and misinterpreting the information that we've got before us. And I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know people who are, but I think that is something that we do need to understand the legal criteria, what it actually means about ethics, because ethics and the way we conduct ourselves, as I said earlier, in public life is key. And I think a little bit of information around that, the law that it's based by, so that we understand that outside the churn of political opinion around these things, which is always distracting from the actualities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from us? Councillor Wade.
Yeah, just basically a couple on obviously point one, which is obviously whistleblowing in terms of obviously I'm basically assuming we have a whistleblowing phone line in place and everything else, no problem. Recently I did a piece of work for basically a client, and there's a number of other options available at the moment, which are app and everything else, no problem. And I just wanted to basically double check as well that our processes in relation to whistleblowing, we are ensuring that we're compliant against the relevant legislation, as far as obviously protecting employees and everything else, no problem. And that's obviously been looked at and audited accordingly to make sure the right protections are in place at that point. That was all really.
So a number of things in terms of the official whistleblowing, Graham, in terms of the whistleblowing policy and procedure, and then there's the other issues in terms of people coming forward with complaints or issues, and they're distinct and different things.
Yeah, I can probably just perhaps assist in terms of compliance. Yeah, we've had a compliant whistleblowing procedure in place since I've been imposed, and I suppose there's a common misconception about what whistleblowing is, and what a whistleblowing procedure is. I mean, corporately, it's a sequential approach. So our whistleblowing policy reflects best practice in terms of raising it internally first, but sequentially, if you can't do so, then going externally. And I think it's only the external notifications that get sort of targeted in public consciousness of what whistleblowing is. But so I think part of our Speak Up campaign has been to sort of clarify that sequential approach, and it's not a big scary thing, you know. You can raise it sequentially.
But obviously, as a member of the authority, their only method at the moment is to make a phone call, or in order to whistleblow.
Yeah, so I mean, our procedure went through overview and audit in March, and so basically we've had, as Graham said, we've had the whistleblowing kind of procedure in place for a long time. So there are various different routes that you can go through. So it's you can kind of raise a grievance, you can kind of do all of those kind of things. It just depends whether at what level, whether the person kind of feels that whether they're going to be listened to, what it is. So it's basically there's a number that they call is for internal staff. If it's somebody who's external, that's like using our complaints procedure. But basically what we've done is we have put up the posters, we've publicised that. But the next bit on from the whistleblowing procedure is our Speak Up campaign, and marketing communications team have been working with my team just to reassure people that actually if they do bring something forward, how it will be dealt with, and the support and everything that's in place.
I do think you raise a good point about how people raise it. So that ability to email it versus going to an app and raise it. Sometimes writing it down just gives you more time to get it writing. Kind of.
I mean, my clients in question, they've adopted an app. Which basically is working perfectly for them. So not everybody's a verbal person, and again they just want to write it down from then upon. The big thing for them as well is their policy at the moment was still operating under the old EU directive, and it had never been updated, and there's a couple of changes obviously ever since we've left as well.
So just before, so I can just second, Councillor. So I think there's a couple of interesting points in there that I think you should definitely take away. So I think that if you can perhaps share outline specific EU legislation point, but I think the point about the method with which people can raise concerns, I think is a really well made one actually. So I know we've adopted the policy, but I think if there's nothing, we should make sure we improve it. Perhaps if there's some best practice to share, that'd be great. Councillor Darlington.
Yeah, I was just going to say a little bit more to what you said, and I think Councillor Waite raises a really important point, which is a phone line has to be monitored and answered. But if you're at 2 a.m. and you can't sleep because of the stress of what you're experiencing at work, sometimes an email is a much easier route forward for you. And those people that do want that extra bit of time to look at it, go back. So I think it's a really good point and very well made.
Good, thank you. Any other comments? Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Simon. Once a question, and Anne-Marie in her introduction mentioned that some things haven't started because there are other items that need to finish beforehand, but we're under 5 weeks away and this report is now 10 days old. So sort of an update on, are you going to achieve everything by the 1st of June? And the second question is, how are we engaging with the Fire Brigade Union on some of this work? Because I see there's an important partner with the Fire Authority, the officers and the union.
Yeah, in terms of the ones that are due by the 1st of June, I think we're making good progress. Some of the ones that we haven't started are further out, so it requires.
The ones that are due by the 1st of June that we haven't started, that's the one I'm worried about, not the ones that are October or anything. There's some that are due by the 1st of June
Yes.
weren't started when you issued the report.
Some of it was the speed of getting this report, but yeah, I'm relatively comfortable that we have stuff in place. And if we don't, by the time we present it at the next Fire Authority, they'll go as being escalated or show us off track. In terms of the Fire Brigade Union, whilst we haven't consulted them on this report, the bits that sit underneath it, so things like the whistleblowing procedure, I've just come off an employee engagement call that there's an FBU rep on there. We do engage with them at various processes. I know Mick meets them on a regular basis.
I went through the report with the brigade secretary just last week. We went through every recommendation and he was, yeah,
going to say thank you.
And some of the recommendations are also in the Exploring Our Culture. So that went to the exec in March, but it went to JCF as well. So they have been cited on it. There is obviously some crossover. So they are aware.
Yeah, just from a national perspective as well, there I lead for the National Fire Chiefs Council on Industrial Relations. Following the culture conference that we attended recently, one of the outcomes from that was that the chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council and myself and 2 other colleagues would engage with the Fire Brigade Union at a national level, at General Secretary level, to talk about actually how we move these issues forward. It's a very big issue for the Fire Brigade Union and other unions themselves, because they find themselves in a really difficult position, because a lot of their members may be committing these acts against other members, and it's a really difficult position that they find themselves in. Having said that, from a local perspective, and also from a national perspective, I also feel that they're grappling with that issue, but they are engaged from it. And I've had nothing but positive engagements on a local basis from the representative bodies in terms of how to tackle this moving forward, because it's a joint issue, it's a joint problem, and we've got to tackle it together as we move forward.
Just to build on the point on the timings, there are 2 actions that have a 1st of June 23 not started marker, which are number 4 and number 21. I think just as a point of principle on action plans and recommendations, that's always good practice to make sure you hit the first deadline. So just on those 2 specific actions, can you just give us confidence that those 2 will be met? So it's the professional standards function and the 360-degree feedback for senior leaders.
Probably going to need to ask.
Number 4.
Yeah.
So let's try with number 4. Start with number 4. Chief officers should show themselves updates on how concerns have been handled or shared with those who have raised them. one of the things that I've done is that I've commissioned legal advice from a specific HR legal advice provider. And myself and Graham had a conversation yesterday. Now, part of that advice also relates to issues in terms of disciplinary inquiries within the service. But part of that advice also includes things such as procedural issues in terms of feedback, in terms of the ACAS guidance, in terms of feedback following disciplinary investigations. So one of the things that we talked about yesterday, as an example, one of the things we talked about yesterday, myself and Graham, and I don't want to go into too much of the detail of it, was that actually how he picks up parts of that feedback from the legal advice that we've had moving forward and puts that into the service as we go forward. So there's an example of how we've moved on that. In terms of creating a professional standards function to handle conduct concerns in the service, I've been approached by other fire and rescue services that border us, not Thames Valley services, interestingly, but we will be engaging with Thames Valley, and actually in terms of thinking about actually, is there a collaboration opportunity that we can do there, collaboration piece that we can do in terms of that sort of function. But I've already, like I said, I've already been approached by chief fire officers from 2 different services that border us that actually have said, can we get together and provide a service on that? So there's nothing concrete there, but discussions have already been held in them respects in terms of moving that piece on.
Yes, sorry, go on. It seems to me on that action in particular, there are 2 components to it, one of which is what the near-term action is demanding of you, which is that you're able to assure yourself that updates on how concerns are being handled with those that raise them. So that is effectively what's the ongoing communication process. That feels to me like an eminently doable action by the 1st of June. I think the consideration of professional standards function clearly is a bit longer. So can we just, I'm sorry to be, so can we take confidence from that point that you're on the first element, you are confident that we will be able to demonstrate that we've met that action by the 1st of June?
Yes, I think we are. There are other constraints within that legal advice that I've received, but there are other constraints within that legal advice. But yes,
okay.
Have we had discussions? Can we meet that? Yes.
Fine, great. Sorry, Councillor Fletcher, did I see your hand a minute ago?
Yeah.
Was it on this? Is it on item 4?
It's on the areas around whistleblowing, whatever. Yeah.
I'll just come back on to 21.
No, can we do it? Let's do it in order.
Oh,
Let's do it in order, and then I'll come to 21 in a second. Yeah. Are you talking on 4 or?
Yeah, I think that's what you're talking about. Whistleblowing.
No, I just want to go through the specific
No,
item.
that's where I was coming back to, which was what Ashley was mentioning.
Okay, I will come back. I'll let you. I'm being slightly more generous today and let people speak more than once, subject to the standing orders. So I will come back to you, I promise. But it's only once, right? It's not happening in other fire authority meetings.
In terms of 21, 360. So we currently do have a 360-degree feedback process. It's available. What we've got work to do is how we do that for the roles that we want to go out and ask feedback. From an SMT perspective, we were actually rather than talk about assistant chief fire officer and equivalent above, we actually make that broader to the whole of SMT. So there is a procedure, there is a process in place, there is a company we use. It's more about now how we broadcast that out and how wide we go to get feedback from everybody.
Fine. Okay. So actually that is not a not started update, that seems to me, because you have a process in place where you're talking about strengthening and communicating that process. So it might be worth just updating that action. That's really helpful. Thank you. So I'll let you come back on the whistleblower.
Well, thank you very much. Going back to Ashley's point around disclosure, which Emily was in discussion with, I think one of the things we have to recognise is that item 35 is going to be key in the way this has gone forward. So what we are as a society is probably have not got a perfect way of doing this, because if we had a perfect way of doing this disclosure and the way that we working bodies, unions, people can act on behalf of their colleagues, and your colleagues can act on behalf for you, we wouldn't be here. So although this report makes loads of recommendations, the main thing that they should have been looking at is best policy around disclosure and to establish what is the best route for doing this and work around that. Because if we had that work done around there and this disclosure work had been done at an earlier stage, many of these needs for these reports would not be taking place. So I rather think they're putting horse before the cart, and the trouble's in the cart, if you know what I mean. We're going along with us all the while. It's an agricultural term. You have to be a farmer to understand
Okay,
that.
well,
But you can see what I mean. We're putting the problem with us all the while as we go forward. Because they're not addressing the problem, which is how people accurately disclose. And I really would think we should ask people who work in Parliament to actually do some body work around that, because that would solve all of this if there was a nice best policy. If there was a best policy, we wouldn't be reviewing these things today, because they would have been picked up a decade ago.
so I'm sure that it's the fact I'm not a farmer that is the reason I couldn't follow that analogy. But I think if I understand the point, again, I come back to this hasn't been driven by Parliament. It's been driven by HMI and their work. As it happens on the call that we just had, one of the questions, well, I asked the question of HMI about their own lessons learned in terms of the reviews they've undertaken where they haven't uncovered these things, and they talked a bit about some of how they responded to that. One of the things that they have indicated is being put in place is they've been working with the National Fire Chiefs Council to put in place a best practice portal that captures, and also I think you confirmed we've been feeding into that piece of work. So clearly, when that best practice portal goes live, whistleblowing is probably one of the good things to make sure that we look at. But your broader point on Parliament, I think we've covered. Any other comments from members? I've got a number, but I'm going to wait until the end. Okay, let me do mine then, if that's okay. So I should say, just for the record, I think we covered this in the letter that the Chief Firing Officer sent to all elected representatives across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, but on a non-identifiable basis, I was taken through both the cases that the historic cases and ongoing cases that we had reported to HMI, just so I could understand the context, and also the disciplinary and grievance processes and how things were handled, just so I could get assurance, which I did after the London Fire Brigade report. So just to assure members that that was done. So one of the things I'll take these points in order and get an answer on and go through them all at once. One of the things that's quite striking, and it was raised by HMI this morning, is that the fire service has this unique strength in watch cultures, which are really important to the success of the service, but it's also where a lot of these issues get hot-housed and things have been coming through, and particularly in the LFB report that came out, but it was also in the HMI report. Could you just take us through how, as a senior leadership team, you satisfy yourselves about individual watch cultures and just your perspective on that, and how we can get assurance that we don't have pockets of watch culture, that we just don't have sight to things that are going on?
It's difficult. One of the things that I would say in terms of the changes within Buckinghamshire over the last number of years, necessity and Miller invention and all that, is the fact that actually we don't have fixed watches in many ways on any given time, because we operate the bank shifts, which is different to most other services. Most watches will have between a quarter, a third of people who are new, not on that watch, coming in every day or every night, every shift. So you have this workforce which moves around. We move people around on a regular basis, not just on bank shifts, etc. So you don't get that fixed watch culture in that sense. And that, I think that's a positive in my experience over the years. You can have watches that have been together for 8, 10, 15 years. Same people, same culture, same behaviours, all of that sort of stuff. You don't tend to get that here. And you haven't had that. Again, I'm not complacent. Every single thing I have to preface with, I'm not complacent in any way. There's been an injection as well of apprentices in the last number of years as well, which has made a huge difference in terms of the expectations of people coming into the service now are completely different, and their expectations of how they will be treated are completely different in many ways. And that change in workforce has definitely helped. How do we assure ourselves that there isn't any watch cultures that we're not happy with? We look at the disciplines, we look at grievances, we look at exit interviews. Any member of staff, for example, can have an exit interview with the Chief Fire Officer. It's included in the letter. They all have exit interviews, and I've done them on a regular basis. In which case, I will actually say, what are the issues? Why are you leaving? And all of that, them sorts of things. So we have them on a regular basis. Are we complacent? No, we're not. Are there things hidden from us that we're not aware of? There may well still be, but we monitor on a regular basis, grievances, disciplines, feedback, watch visits, all of them things we look at on a regular basis. To try and assure ourselves that we're in the right place at the right time. But I can't be sure that there aren't things that are hidden from us.
So, I think you're right.
I was just going to support Jason's points around a more sort of transition, flexible workforce. I came from a service that was that deep-rooted watch culture that never changed. When I came here, it was very different because even with our on-call firefighters, they can be on bank shifts riding the whole time as well. So that kind of that cross working has, well, in my opinion, produced a much better culture in that respect. And as we operate more flexibly with our flexi firefighters as well, they move around the county on a daily basis. So we do, as Jason says, we can never be complacent, but we do have a lot of feedback that we get, most of it positive. And if there was anything negative, then we deal with it. But I do think that more transition peripatetic workforce does work better for us with regards to the old culture of where if you was on the blue watch, wherever, you were there forever. And that was how we operated, and wouldn't let anyone else in. That has broken that down.
And do we equip watch commanders in particular to be able to step back and be coached and facilitated through how they reflect on the cultures in their watches and what they should be looking for and how they can make them? What leadership and development support do we give to watch commanders?
So yeah, we've just done a leadership and management development program, and whilst it started from the top, it has gone all the way down to watch commander, and actually those sessions involved different watch commanders, support staff, all in the same room, being trained in much smaller groups. It was based around the NFC leadership framework, so leading the service, leading the team, and leading yourself. So we haven't just said, oh, it's an up here issue that's got to, we've kind of cascaded it down to the watch commander. Didn't really anything else.
No,
Good, thank you.
Simon, can I answer something you raised on the apprenticeship scheme, which I think we all believe have been a great success. Are there modules thereon about the culture and what to expect and where to go, rather than, that's a fire engine, there's a hose and so on? Is there the softer side as a formal part of the training?
Yeah, so just in terms of the actual kind of application process, we did introduce a couple of years ago a behaviours part of the actual interview. So there's obviously the different kind of sections that need to kind of be gone through. And yes, there's the interview, but there's also a behaviours workshop as well. So that is very much part of the assessment. But when they do join us, it is part of the induction. So basically they go through kind of our values, what we expect and all those kind of things. So that is, is very much gone through with them.
Thank you very much.
So can I turn now to 34, the Code of Ethics? So ethics. So we've marked that as complete, and the action was chief foresters should review their implementation of the core Code of Ethics and make sure it's being applied across their services. The update effectively states we put these values in place in 2011 and they're embedded in the service. So two questions. I think if I walked into lots of organisations and I talked to the senior leaders, they'd be totally convinced that their values are embedded across their organisation. And I can be almost as certain that if I went into an office in that organisation, the values would not be at all embedded and nobody could name them without having them in front of them. So just, again, give us assurance about how we're so confident that those values are embedded. And then secondly, more specifically, just assure me that we haven't just looked at that action and gone, yeah, we've got a set of values and we're confident they're embedded. How have we, in the context of this report, stepped back and challenged ourselves again about the implementation that's been successful?
Do you want to start on?
Well, no, I'm probably going to have that in terms of, so when the Code of Ethics, so the values were introduced before the Code of Ethics came out from the NFCC. One of the reasons they introduced that Code of Ethics was when they went round and looked, a number of services didn't have any values at all. So at the point that Code of Ethics were introduced, the team did a review of our values versus the Code of Ethics. Hence why we focused on the values part of it rather than the Code of Ethics. We do talk about values in terms of when we talk about our end of year reviews and our appraisals, and throughout the work we do, Hence why there was, I'm gonna say some assurance. I feel like you never have 100% assurances out there, but I do get your point that whilst they can be on the wall and they're on the wall of every single station out there, whether people couldn't describe them. We spent a lot of time when we did the first round of inspections. Remember Jason sitting in a leadership meeting saying, it's not necessarily about being able to recite them, but it's about being able to say what you would be happy or not happy to have happen in the service, rather than necessarily being able to recite them.
Also, just to build on that, the LMDP, Leadership Management Development Programme that Anne-Marie mentioned, that was built on our values. So everything hung off our values in that respect, and all of our promotion and development processes are all values based. So again, we can't guarantee that everybody would be able to recite those values, but it's demonstrating that they work to those values. So, but our values do form the basis of lots of our processes that touch everybody in the organisation.
So we looked, so when the code of ethics were, the core code of ethics, we were part of the consultations, there were various different workshops, and we looked at what we had and we looked at what the NFCC, and we did map across. I mean, it would be fair to say, I think some of the wording was slightly different, but I think in essence it was the same. So we made that decision at that point that we would say that we would that we supported it, and we put the communications out on that. But when the code of conduct was recently reviewed, as you're aware, it obviously forms part of that. Yes, they are on the station. Can everybody recite them? I'm not sure that they can recite them kind of verbatim, but they are in you know, a part of our procedures. So when you look at the kind of like the people strategy, ED&I, all of those kind of things, but I hate using the word golden thread, but we do keep coming back to them to kind of say that that's where we're starting from, and that's the kind of reason there.
And I suppose the question, both the question I'm asking and the point I'm making is understanding for yourselves what you mean by embedded and how you satisfy yourself that they're embedded. So, you know, what is it in terms of behaviours and indicators that you expect to see that go, do you know what, we're confident actually that people are, you know, recognising individuals that are showing positive behaviours, but also calling out those that positive demonstration values and those that are not. And so I think it's easy to talk about, it's easy to get yourself in a cycle as a leadership team that just because you're saying something and you've embedded it in processes, it's actually being lived and breathed by people in the organisation. And I think just challenging ourselves and yourselves around how do we know it's really embedded, and how are we constantly holding ourselves to account about it and recognising it that great, but values that are embedded are about dialogue back and forth. It's not just about communicating outwards. Okay, thank you. My next question relates to, we've talked quite a lot in previous performance reports about using the performance reviews, using the data that's in there. And we've talked about appraisal completion, we've talked about mandatory training as lead indicators that all is not well in the line management of individuals in the team. And again, I just want to come back to that, because for me, that is one of the really, you know, and it's not to say that data is what helps us understand the culture is in a good place, but it should be for management a really important trigger to say all may not be well. So Kane, could you just take us through and give us assurance about how you are now, you know, really using those performance indicators, and I just use those two, but there are others around mandatory training completion, around appraisal completion, to be confident about the leadership cultures and management cultures that are in place.
So we continue to review these on a quarterly basis, but for going into this year, we are going to start to drill down into those, providing those information for each team so that they can then start to really understand what's going on. We've had
Sorry, Anne-Marie, I'm really sorry to interrupt. I've just been reminded of the time, so if you'd hold your thought. Some members wanted us to observe the International Workers' Memorial Day. Got that right? Yep. So it is shortly to be 12 o'clock, so we'll observe a moment's silence for that. Yes, sorry, start now. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, it's getting a bit slow, Anne-Marie.
That's okay. So, yeah, as I said, we have been reporting on them quarterly, all the way up to members. We now want to move to providing more team-specific information around those measures so that each team can hold themselves to account. The Performance Monitoring Board is now looking at these in much more detail than it has ever done previously to understand what's going on. And often if something is noticed, then a further report is then provided to drill down. So for example, I know there's work ongoing around exit interviews and leavers rates and understanding that in more detail. So then a more further report is then produced for the relevant team to take action on.
Okay, thank you. And then penultimate point from me. We're obviously doing a huge amount on recruitment, and the volume of applicants coming through the process and the numbers we're taking through are significantly increasing. Could you just again give us assurance about how through the process of recruitment we're challenging ourselves constantly about the diversity, both of the talent pools that we're accessing, the diversity of applicants, and how the diversity of those applicants is being monitored through the process? Because clearly one of the most effective ways to make sure the culture is right is that we've got a diversity of thought and representation in terms of our colleagues. Yeah, just a bit more about how we're doing that, give members assurance.
Yeah, that's fine, that's fine. So in terms of the applicants, we do look at all the protected characteristics. We've been doing that from quite a few cohorts back of that, yeah, I like to use it, but the kind of like the dropout rates at each area. So basically we're running reports of each protected characteristic for each stage and kind of looking at how we can improve. So looking at have a go days for specific protected characteristics and kind of setting those up. In terms of the engagement, the ED&I group and my HR team, we have really been trying to work hard on the South Asian community. So we attended Eid in the Park last Saturday, and we're planning for the one in June. People have Asif and Pete have been to a couple of mosques just to kind of raise awareness of the service recruitment. We go to career open days. We've been to armed forces, covered it. So there's armed forces days. There's lots of kind of things that we're trying to do to get out in the community. And as part of the ED&I group, we're always looking to, to look at other areas that we can. We can't look at all the protected characteristics at once. So we're trying to focus on the South Asian community. Last year, we prepared to go to Pride. We couldn't unfortunately attend because of the Queen's passing, but we're preparing to kind of go again. So we try and do at least 4 events a year to raise kind of the engagement and awareness of the fire service to make ensure that it's more diverse. But there's always more that we can do. We are trying to do. In terms of kind of internally, as Anne-Marie said, we have been kind of working on our data internally as well. So we obviously look at all the information of applicants that come in and as they go through the service and the various different, their journeys through the service. So there's some kind of phase 2 of the ED&I data kind of project is focusing on what we do with the data. So, yeah.
Thank you. Final point, and then we'll bring this to a close unless some of the other members wish to speak. We did, when the report first came out, we did an update to all elected members across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. I think one of the actions that we need to make sure we don't lose is that I feel quite strongly that it does get to the heart of how we give the community confidence that their fire and rescue service is where it needs to be. And so I'd like an action where we think through how we, as well as internally through the scrutiny and everything else that we do here at the authority, we make sure that we're regularly communicating externally the actions we're taking, the tone with which we're taking those actions, so that there's no complacency, no defensiveness, and to give people a sense that we've, responded with sufficient pace and action to the report. So can perhaps we just capture an action for myself and the Chief Fire Officer just to reflect on how we do that, and we perhaps make sure we bring that back to a future authority meeting. Are there any final questions, comments before we move to the recommendations? Anne-Marie?
Something else
might be possible. Cover it in the summary. I'm trying to find out when the next fire authority meeting is.
I'm going to do that.
And it's more of a, I suppose, an ask really. So one of the observations is, as standing over PMO, is that we have lots of plans, lots of action plans, lots of recommendations. I just wanted to ask if the authority is comfortable that we make this appendices part of our Exploring the Culture paper rather than have to bring back separate reports. It would just make sure that we're kind of showing the work in one way, in a simple way, and make us more efficient in how we deliver that work.
So I'm sure I speak for all members when I say that the simplicity managing this thing is important for us as much for us as it is for you. So yes, you should absolutely do that. And I think when we communicate to HMIs, FRS, our response to the report, we should. So one of the things that I propose that we do is that myself and the Chief Officer write to HMI CFRS to explain the discussion we've had and hopefully the recommendations we've agreed, but talk about how we're integrating it into the wider plans and set of actions that we've got. So I think that's really important. I think just a couple of final thoughts. So firstly, thank you to officers for the work on it, because we had it on the 30th of March and here we are on the 28th of April with a really good response, and we've had a good discussion. So I don't underestimate the amount of work that it's taken. I think it was Councillor Darlington made the first initial point. This needs to be part of the suite of things that we're thinking about, but it's not the only thing, and all of the other work and progress we've made is important we sustain that. What I think you should take from the discussion we've had is that the authority takes this really seriously, and that seriousness, should resources ever be a barrier to doing these things, it's important you share that with us, because I wouldn't want, and I'm sure I'm not alone, I wouldn't want us to not do things because resources are an issue. This is really important to the quality of the service that we deliver. And I think, just to reiterate, it's important that as members we are challenging of the progress that you make and that we scrutinise you, but I hope what you've got a sense of is a strong sense of support from us as well, that we really want this to be a seminal moment for our service, at least, that we respond. And so you have all of our support in progressing the actions as you need to do. So we're being asked to agree 3 recommendations, that the Fire Authority should accept the recommendations allocated to the Chief Fire Officer in full, but the service will fully engage and support the delivery of the remaining recommendations, and that the Fire Authority support of risk being escalated to the Corporate Risk Register. Are we happy to accept those recommendations? Agreed. Thank you very much. So our next meeting, and I think just to build on Councillor McLean's point, it'd be useful for a further update to go to the next authority meeting, is on Wednesday, the 14th of June 2023 at 11 AM, and it will be at the Oculus in Buckinghamshire Council, and that will be the annual meeting of the Fire Authority. Hard to believe that a year has come around. So look forward to seeing everybody there, and on the basis there's no further business, I'll close the meeting there. Thank you.